art in its widest, deepest level, under all those forms is a central, innate rhythm that's tied to our aliveness. So yes, just as we don't choose to inhale or exhale, we have no choice. We don't say, well, I think I'm really more into inhaling. No, it doesn't work. And likewise, the way the heart breathes is by feeling and perceiving and expressing. That's how the heart inhales and exhales. And so it doesn't matter by what means you do that. Everyone has to do that in order to stay healthy and here and awake.
You are now listening to the Soul and Wonder Podcast, episode 74, A Life of Expression with Mark Nepo.
Welcome to the Soul and Wonder Podcast, where the conduits of the body, depths of the mind, and atlas of the soul are explored with devotion. Through cultural exchange, Christopher and Sarah and their guests will deliver sacred wisdom from around the globe, uncovering the hidden gems of conscious living and holistic healing, all to empower you on your journey of self-discovery. And now, here are your hosts, Christopher and Sarah.
What is happening, everybody? Christopher and Sarah here to welcome you back to yet another episode of the Soul and Wonder Podcast. Every other week, we bring you new interviews with world-renowned thought leaders and authors to support you in your personal growth and spiritual evolution. And whether you're a newbie or a longtime listener, we are so happy you decided to join us for another jam-packed, wisdom-filled episode. Today, we have Mark Nepo, author, poet, teacher, and thought leader, and we are so excited to dive into this interview with him. It is definitely one of our favorites. But before we do so, we want to remind you to make sure you subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube. And of course, if you love what you hear, please leave us a review and share with your friends and family.
Mark Nepo. What an incredible man. He has moved and inspired readers and seekers all over the world with his #1 New York Times bestseller, The Book of Awakening. You may have heard of it. Beloved as a poet, teacher, and storyteller, Mark has been called, quote, one of the finest spiritual guides of our time, a consummate storyteller, and an eloquent spiritual teacher. And I agree wholeheartedly. His work is widely accessible and used by many, and his books have been translated into more than 20 languages. A best-selling author, he has published 20 books and recorded 14 audio projects. In 2015, he was given a Life Achievement Award by Age Nation, and in 2016, he was named by Watkins Mind, Body, Spirit as one of the 100 most spiritually influential living people, and was also chosen as one of OWN's Super Soul 100, a group of inspired leaders using their gifts and voices to elevate humanity. In 2017, Mark became a regular columnist for Spirituality and Health magazine. Mark was also part of Oprah Winfrey's The Life You Want tour in 2014 and has appeared several times with Oprah on her Super Soul Sunday program on OWN TV. He's also been interviewed by Robin Roberts on Good Morning America. The Exquisite Risk was listed by Spirituality and Practice as one of the best spiritual books of 2005, calling it, quote, one of the best books we've ever read on what it takes to live an authentic life. Mark devotes his writing and teaching to the journey of inner transformation and the life of relationship. He continues to offer readings, lectures, and retreats, so please visit Mark as well at 3intentions.com and wmespeakers.com/speaker/Mark-Nepo. So in today's episode, we're going to dive into his new book that has just hit the shelves, September 2019, called Drinking from the River of Light, A Life of Expression. Now, this book presents the art and practice of our creativity as a means to unfold our spiritual growth. Whether we consider ourselves artists or not, he explores how the deeper we go into the creative process, the more attuned we become, and the more we join with everything around us. Whether your writing is published or not, whether your music is recorded or not, whether your art is in a gallery or not, your garden is given a prize or not, or your cooking is or is not featured in the local paper, inhabiting a personal life of expression is its own reward, by which we strengthen our connections and we find our way. Filled with stories and exercises intended to introduce readers to the skills of vision, perception, feeling, and articulation, Drinking from the River of Light is a culmination of all Nepo's years of writing and teaching regarding the deeper creative process.
And in this interview, we cover a wide array of topics, including Mark's inspiration behind his latest book, Drinking from the River of Light, A Life of Expression, and how almost dying from cancer 30 plus years ago opened his eyes to the flow of creation. We also talk about the many layers of art of expression and the fundamental purpose of creation, the impact of our societal hunger for achievement and recognition on our connection with self-expression, how to cultivate the faith and trust necessary for remaining present in the divine unfolding of our expression, as well as updates on Mark's new spiritual journeys available to the public in 2020.
I just hope you let every single word that Mark shares with us today on this interview just seep into every pore of your being. He is truly a poet, and he brings messages down to earth in a way that feels like truth. So enjoy this one. Welcome back, listeners. We now have Mark with us. Mark, thank you so much. We're so grateful to share this space with you today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It's wonderful. I look forward to our talk.
Just to tell our listeners, we got a little sneak peek into your book that you're working on now. By the time this recording is released, the book will probably have hit the shelves, Drinking from the River of Light, A Life of Expression. And I was just telling Mark, listeners, that when we were reading through this first part, it was just like an energetic activation. You just felt the energy moving through you as he helped guide you to the truths that you already know within yourself, you just may have forgotten. And so, Mark,
incredibly magical.
We are excited.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to pick your brain about this book. So before we get into like the details of the book and the content, I'm curious, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I think this goes back to, the journey that's really happened to me years ago. I'm 68 now and in my 30s, as you probably know from a lot of my work. I was stricken with a rare form of lymphoma and went through about 3 years where, I almost died, and blessed to be here. And being blessed to still be here, everything kind of got rearranged in me, and my whole understanding of art and expression shifted. Up until that time, I had a doctorate that I got by the time I was like 28 or 29, and I was already teaching at a university, and I was really hoping and devoted to a life of art and poetry and teaching, and hoping if I really, really worked hard, maybe I would write 1 or 2 poems that might, someone might consider great. And then, I got turned upside down and inside out by almost dying and being still blessed to be here. And my whole understanding of art and expression shifted because I became much more interested in the expressive journey of healing, and not so much, even with good intent, even when we work, toward creating lasting, meaningful art, we are so insidiously imprinted with the manufacturing mindset that everything's a product. And the thing that really happens, and we can, if we're blessed, create things that have meaning and that are useful. But when we devote ourselves, we're the ones created for that commitment and devotion. And so, I started out hoping to write great poems. And then when I was ill, forget that, I was needing to discover true poems that would help me live and be here. And now in my 60s, I just want to be the poem.
I love it.
That's beautiful.
So let's dive into a little bit about the art of expression. What are the many layers of this art, and why is this just as vital as something like breathing oxygen?
Yeah, so, that's kind of the central metaphor, is the sense that I've been long interested in there are many, many wonderful, outstanding books about craft and language and about technique in all art forms. But what I've been drawn to, because of what we just were talking about, is what's the life-giving innate practice that's tied to our aliveness, and under whatever form it might be. And let's widen the forms, like not just the formal arts that we consider the arts, but, I would call art anything that engages us. It could be gardening. It could be being an auto mechanic and having such a love, anything that any process that we devote ourselves, it could be to collecting stamps or rare forms of flowers or stones. I mean, whatever it might be, or working, in a food kitchen. So art in its widest, deepest level, under all those forms, is a central, innate rhythm that's tied to our aliveness. So yes, just as we don't choose to inhale or exhale, we have no choice. We don't say, well, I think I'm really more into inhaling. No, it doesn't work. And likewise, the way the heart breathes is by feeling and perceiving and expressing. That's how the heart inhales and exhales. And so it doesn't matter by what means you do that. Everyone has to do that in order to stay healthy and here and awake and alive. So this whole investigation, which is really at the intersection of where I've always lived as a learning artist, writer, and where I've always lived as a learning guide teacher. So, it's really about that exploration of the deeper terrain and skill sets that we all have to negotiate to be that alive. And so, one metaphor I use very early on in the book is, just as all the traditions, the meditation traditions, we don't meditate to become great breathers. We meditate to become clear vessels. And likewise with expression, we don't write or paint or dance to become great writers, painters, or dancers. We do that to become clear vessels, to help us to reduce what's between us and life. So there's hardly anything there.
It's that true flow state, that ultimate presence. And I'm glad that you clarified too that the art of expression isn't limited to what we might, think of as art, like studio art or poetry or music, that it spans across a wide variety of whatever brings you to life, that you're so overjoyed to be present with that task as you create it and it creates you. It's like this beautiful dance. And so I think so many people doubt that they are innately artists, right? We doubt our own existence.
Yeah, everyone is an artist, and we're all, for me, poetry with a big P, I don't even mean words on a page. I mean, poetry is the unexpected utterance of the soul that comes along to restore us. And so, this, how do we find this, whatever it is for us that allows the heart to inhale and exhale? Well, paradoxically, it's not so easy for human beings. You would think it would be, but animals. There was a female mystic from Germany from the Middle Ages, Mechthild, and she said beautifully. She said, "A bird doesn't fall from the sky, and a fish doesn't drown in water. Each creature must find their God-given element." And so it's pretty easy for a bird and a fish. They know where they are. But we are such diverse, complex creatures with so many gifts that it's not so easy for us to find what's our air and what's our water. And that's why it's so important to be present and to stay true and to stay open, because these are the ways that we find what works for us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, and some of us really struggle to feel our own specialness, to find that element. And we fall into this belief that our expression isn't worthy, or perhaps we fall into that comparison trap where everyone else's creation seems to be quote unquote more important based on like level of impact or talent. And in your book, you have a sentence that really stood out to me. It said, "We all collaborate with the universe in adding to the joy of existence." And I'd like to ask you, how can our listeners, if they are struggling waking up to that truth, how can they wake up to this truth that their sheer beingness is in fact in collaboration with all that is?
Well, so I think what, and again, when I appreciate your questions, and I should say this from the beginning that I don't have any answers, and I can only kind of share my notes on being alive, and so what I offer are examples, not instructions, and so I think what I have found, and this is what is so important and restorative, is to follow, the word trust literally means follow your heart. So our heart is our greatest leader, guide on this journey. And so when we follow our heart, when we follow what touches us, what has meaning, it will lead us to the next moment and the next moment until we discover an unlikely path. We try because we're so mental heavy in our modern world. We think that, oh, well, I'll just think it out. I'll make a 5-year plan how to discover what touches my heart. Well, that's not how the heart works. And so, it involves risk. And this is true faith. True faith, practical, functional faith, is not belief in an idea or some doctrine or a code or a set of character values. It's trust in the vibrancy of life that's just beyond what we know. And we follow that. And so I would offer, because we also, I would say that we never, I personally don't believe in a permanent state of enlightenment. It may be possible for some beings. I don't know, maybe the Dalai Lama is permanently enlightened or someone like that, but that's not been my experience on Earth. And I feel like we are, as human beings, we're a walking paradox. The being is infinite and the human is very finite. And so, we fall down and get up, and we're sensitive and then we're insensitive, and we're clear and we're confused. So when we fall down, the way that we need to get up is to return to being completely present, holding nothing back, and following our heart and see what's there. And it will become our teacher.
What a beautiful way to explain that flow state once again, and the following your excitement to lead you exactly where you need to be, exactly when you need to be there. And out of curiosity, when you say that you follow your heart, What sort of sensations do you notice within your being when you know, in fact, you are following your heart and not going against it?
Well, there's a tenderness, there's an aliveness, there's energy, there's clarity.
Mm.
Even if I can't name it, it's not about naming it, it's about experiencing it. And so that restores me. And then what happens is, when we are present and we hold nothing back and we allow ourselves to feel whatever it is, it might be a pleasant sensation, it might not be a pleasant sensation. Even pain and confusion are teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So, but when that happens, it cleanses my eyes, my ears, and my mind. And now I see, hear, and feel differently. And therefore, I make different decisions with a clear mind and a clear heart and a clear body. And that's, one of the rewards of being present is that it cleanses all of our instruments.
And what a liberating feeling that is, because exactly what you just mentioned, I know I can feel wholeheartedly when I'm tapped into that presence, especially when it's doing something that I absolutely love to do. And, in the beginning of the conversation, you had touched on a little bit about how, well, one, that we are complex and diverse beings, and that we do, maybe from a societal standpoint, create things out of the need for recognition and achievement. And how do you feel the urge to create out of hunger for achievement has impacted our collective relationship with self-expression overall?
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question, and all these things. Let me preface this by saying, all the things we're talking about, as we talk about them, we can't eliminate them. We can only right size them, and it's part of our incarnation. Like every generation, wisdom doesn't give us a shortcut to the journey. It simply supports our turn in the journey. So, there's no getting out of this. And why would we? It's wonderful, even though it's hard sometimes. So I think that there's this kind of, we all have both a need to see and a need to be seen. And so when they get out of proportion is when we struggle out of balance, if all, so this is a way into your question. If all we do, if through solitude, we all have our direct experience of this mystery we call life. And that renews us, and paradoxically, we all have that. We all have that. It reminds us that every one of us is like Adam or Eve. Just there's nothing between us and this miracle, how rare it is to be here at all. And if anything, that was the greatest gift of almost dying from cancer, is this touchstone that how rare it is to be here at all. And now, if all I'm left with is my direct experience, oh boy, because then, so presence allows us to remember how rare it is to be here, and it renews our direct experience of life. And it allows me, if I'm present, truly present, it allows me then to understand who and what you are. Now we talk about meaning, because meaning is relational. Meaning is relational. So now, so if all I have is my experience, then all of a sudden I'm not clear. I become stubborn. I become opinionated. I don't welcome other views. I'm encased in my own bubble of my view of life. So we need to restore our own experience, but we need each other's experience, because we're more together than alone, which was the title of my last book. And, but on the other side, in belonging, in wanting, the real wonder of connection and relationship is that we're more together than alone. Is that I can understand and see and feel more for being with you in some ways than being just by myself. But the liability of that is that, for love, I'll give everything I know away in a second. I'll say, no, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. Whatever it is, just don't go away. Don't leave. So now let's get back to your question a little bit with that underpinning. And that is that there is this kind of tension all the time that, we live in a modern world that is so focused on getting attention and getting ahead. We are all taught that to get in any field, to get ahead, you must get attention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But to get a heart, you need to give attention.
Mm.
And so, yes, in terms of making it in the world of circumstance and out there, we do need to be seen and heard, and in order to be public. But that's not why we're doing things. I started writing even as a young man as a way to keep the wonder in view a little while longer. It was giving attention. It was recognizing and verifying the mystery and miracle of life that brought me alive. Getting and giving and getting it. And then we have this other thing. We're all desperate to be recognized and verified, which even if we get it, doesn't really do it, because it's seeing that's more life-giving than being seen. It's recognizing and verifying. So, so this moves into our popular, culture, where we have this terrible ache to be a celebrity when we secretly ache for something worthwhile to celebrate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is beautiful hearing you sort of map this out and sharing your personal experience when you were younger, writing, and what that did for you and taught you and allowed you to move through your art. And it reminded me of I'm a studio artist, and so when I was a child, I was always had a sketchbook, and I would draw to draw, and I kept the sketchbook private. I wouldn't show anyone because there was something really beautiful about just expressing myself through exploring the world from the life of a child's eyes, the perspective of a child's eyes, seeing things, making connections for the first time. And there's this life that it brought out of me. But when I went to college for art, I started noticing the more I had to produce material for a grade or for the critique classes, the more I started using it with a goal for achievement, a goal for recognition. And it was almost like the hose I started to kink my own hose, which I learned so much from that. And it was beautiful, but I ended up switching my major because I no longer had this passion to create for that recognition, but it seemed to be my only driving force behind my art. And I felt like the art was just sucked out of me, or I allowed it to be sucked out of me. And to be honest with you, since then, it's been a challenge to re-enter that flow state with that medium, that art form. And I feel like so many people could probably relate to that, even if it's not art or music, but gardening or cooking.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And what I want to respond and encourage you is, and a lot of what I think this book tries to open up is what are the ways that, and I want to encourage you to explore the ways that you can reclaim the authority of your own being. The authority of your own being, because, all of those critiques and all those things in proper perspective, they're helpful. But when they become the way that we are subtly and not so subtly taught to identify ourselves. So, let's all go all the way back, right? We start out, and when you're young, each of us, whether you felt this aliveness in drawing, And so just draw. And then somewhere along the way, somebody or something, or it became apparent, oh, you should become a artist or painter or drawer. Or, I was involved in expression. And so then somebody said, oh, that's a good turn of phrase. You should become a writer. Or if someone likes to twirl in the schoolyard and they do it gracefully, then the teacher says, oh, you would be a good dancer.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with those things, except that you notice that all of them inadvertently turn a verb into a noun. Okay. The life force, the aliveness, the enlivening part to our heart, to go back to how the heart breathes, is in staying a verb. It's fine to become a quote dancer or a writer, but that's not the real identity.
Mm.
So, if you come alive by drawing, then just draw. It doesn't matter what anybody calls it, and so then what happens is we work toward that, and then we go to school, and like I was in a doctoral program, and then, well, am I really a writer if it's not published? Am I really a painter if it's not in a gallery? Am I really, a gardener if my flowers don't win a prize? And so it all gets turned inside out. And if those things happen, that's wonderful. But that's not why we're doing it. And that gets back to the essential life-giving form that is this life of expression. Because even the word, what is not expressed is depressed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when we express together and share that with others, it inspires and motivates each other to go deeper within themselves, ourselves, and explore that as well.
Yeah. And I also want to add, I really want to thank you first off for reigniting the flame within myself. And per this conversation that we're having, Sarah had mentioned obviously about her art and obviously putting that to the side throughout after going through college and doing all of that. But for me, I've had this and I've written a lot and had this urge to really start this memoir on my journey living in Africa for 2 years. And something keeps holding me back. And I finally realized I had a moment of clarity as you were speaking today, Mark. And that moment of clarity hit me over the head. And it is exactly what we were talking about, this need for achievement and being this achievement oriented society that we live in. And really tapping deeper into doing it to relive these magical moments and inspirational moments I had. Not to, if it turns into something great, if it doesn't, it doesn't, but just to do it for myself and to really relive this entire process. And I think for me, I've been coming at it from a standpoint of, this could turn into a great memoir and a book, and who knows where it can go from there. And it's really just the programming that I've endured over the years to think like that.
Yeah.
So you really reignited that flame for me.
Well, I'm glad. And again, there's nothing wrong. Maybe it will become a great book. Who knows? But that's not at heart why we do that. And, and I'd like to say, so a couple of things, I'd like to say honestly too, that, when I was beginning, I so wanted to be published and hoped for, success and all of that. But, as I started to understand myself, as I started to individuate, as I started to understand my own histories and relationships and family and upbringing, under all of that for me was, I had, both my parents are gone now, for about 3 or 4 years. But, my mother especially was very withholding, very conditional kind of love. And so unconsciously, what was I doing? And this is before we had email, so I would send out hundreds of poems to magazines and journals all over. And then I'd run to the mailbox to see if it was accepted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was unconsciously replaying my acceptance and rejection with my mother's love just at the mailbox, over and over. And, I'd like to say it was some wisdom on my part that changed, but, no, it was the humbling experience of my cancer journey and realizing, on the other side of that, wow, that really doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm waking up every day, and that's the reward. And everything else is just like a bonus. And so to get back to your instinct to and your call to want to return to this journey, see, everything is a teacher for us. And I believe that we write or express about what we need to learn, not what we know. I've been blessed to be prolific, but it's only because I've always written about what I need to know. If I only wrote about what I know, I would have written very little. And but we tell stories so that we can digest their meaning. And a lot of times especially older people, will repeat stories, and we think, and sometimes they're just repeating. But often, at any age, we tell stories more than once because their meaning is too much to be digested in one telling. And so I would encourage you, rather than to think about that you want to, relive these 2 years in Africa, it feels to me from what you're sharing that, and this happens for all of us, there was so much there that was important that it bears revisiting so you can keep learning from it. And you can by the life of expression, you start to surface, you return to a conversation. And this is good for all of our listeners. We return to a conversation with the moments that are transforming so they can keep releasing their meaning.
I love that.
It's the integration process.
It is. And
the many layers.
Absolutely. There's so many layers to it, to every experience, really. And it just keep peeling those layers back to reveal so much more. And I think, Sarah and I have been on this personal growth journey for some time. And it's interesting, all the layers that you feel like may have been exposed, they just keep going. And it's quite the ride in the journey. And it's something that I think all of us obviously tapped into this journey. We can learn every single day from new experiences and things that we've done throughout our lives.
Yeah, there's a Hindu phrase called Upa Guru, Upaguru, and it means the teacher that is next to you at this moment. And there's always a teacher next to you at this moment, and it's not limited in any way to human teachers. And so wherever we are, wherever we're going through, there is an Upaguru. And often, in one way to understand the life of the poems that I've written over a lifetime is they're just a record of all the lessons from the Upagurus I've encountered. Something stops me, even if it might be how a bird or a pigeon mistakes a broken piece of glass that's glittering in an alley. For a second, it thinks it's food until it realizes it's not. And then, that just stays with me. What's the lesson there? What's the lesson there? And it's the unfolding of the expression. And so I also want to talk about the power of expression. So, so let me share a couple of stories about that from history of musicians and artists and different things, and the power of expression for us, what it does to us and for us. And, Beethoven is a great example. Beethoven, we know, was this musical genius who, brought music that was never heard in the world or even conceived of in such abundance and in such mastery. And But Beethoven also went deaf by the time he was 28. So imagine that you discover, like we were saying earlier, that your element, your God-given element, you know what it is, you know your gift, and you know you're you're hearing music that's never been heard on earth, but you're starting to realize you're never going to be able to hear it played. Oh my God, what a horrible, awful thing. And he was in despair. And in 1802, he went, there was a small town outside of Vienna, Heiligenstadt, and he told his family he was going to go there to just for like a, we'd call it a retreat, some solitude, but really, privately, he was going there because he was contemplating suicide. It was that painful. He couldn't bear it. He didn't know what to do with this. And so he got there and he began to write what began as a suicide note. It was a letter to his brother. And this is the power of telling the truth of our experience and how even when it's difficult, what we have to say, when we can report authentically, express the truth of our experience, it transforms us. Doesn't necessarily didn't take away his deafness, but it transformed him. So he writes this and it's called now the Heiligenstadt Testament. You can probably Google it, find it online. And he begins to talk about this is so difficult. I can't bear this. How am I going to, I don't know how to do this. And I don't know how to live with it. And after expressing that so honestly, all of a sudden at the end, it stops being a suicide note. And instead, he surprises himself and ends the letter by saying, so I guess I'll make the most music I can with what I have for as long as I can.
Wow.
And he folds up the letter. He puts it in his pocket. He goes back to Vienna, puts it in the back of his top desk drawer, and begins what is arguably the decade of masterpieces, unprecedented, more than any other composer that's ever lived. And when he did die in his late 50s, that letter was discovered by his brother after his death in that top desk drawer.
How powerful, how moving.
To know that he revealed parts of himself to himself through that one letter that he never shared with anyone. And such a vulnerable, raw moment, a journey of true authenticity that's just gave me chills.
Well, and this is the power, when we feel that we're powerless, the greatest power we have is to speak the truth of where we are. Because it will the act of expression itself will restore us and liberate it. It like I said, it didn't take his deafness away, but it made the deafness a part of him rather than he live in the deafness. And this is very helpful for all of us. Another, let me tell one other story, and then if you have other questions, I don't want to cut off your questions, but another story is of Monet. Claude Monet, who we know is this amazing master impressionist, and his masterpiece, the water lilies, these enormous, beautiful impressionist paintings of gardens. So there's two things here that are so powerful and inspiring about Monet. And so one is that, his whole life he was devoted to painting exactly what he saw. That was it. He got to be rather well known in his life, and he lived to be in his 90s. And toward the end of his life, when he was very well known, and he also didn't give very many interviews. And there were all these, he was so well known that the Impressionists were now accepted. He'd lived long enough that they were first seen as, crazy avant-garde painters, and then they became accepted as these innovators. And so there's all this kind of interpretation in France and in Paris and in journals about what his paintings meant and why he painted the light. And so, he kind of got fed up with it. And one day he allowed an art critic to come interview him, and he came all the way from Paris to his gardens, and he got there, and all Monet said was, he goes, "I paint what I see. That's it. It doesn't mean anything." He said, "Interview over." And so now as we take that just a little further, toward the end of his life, Monet had double cataracts. And this was just when cataract surgery was just being explored. And so he was one of the first people to have the first surgeries, and they didn't work. It didn't help him. But he just kept being devoted to painting what he saw. And that's when he painted his masterful water lilies.
Wow.
So here is someone who devoted a lifetime to painting what he saw and to making his way of seeing precise, never knowing that his masterpieces would come by being as devoted to what he was seeing as his seeing was breaking down.
Mm-hmm. The symbolism in their experiences and just the movement. Life is just beautiful. That's all I can say to that. Life is just beautiful.
Well, and the one other thing about Monet is that in order to paint his water lilies, he became a gardener. He created the gardens at Giverny, which was his estate. And the gardens became a work of art all by themselves. So we never know what we're called to do when we follow our heart.
Mm. And that might change, right? The paths might ebb and flow and go through. Yeah, evolve. And that's the beautiful thing about it. We have such, long lives to live through different forms of expression.
Well, and I think, and so here's a story about that evolution, and this is the story of Albert Schweitzer. Now, we know Albert Schweitzer is this great humanitarian who ran a hospital in Africa, created a hospital in Africa. Well, not a lot of people realize that Albert Schweitzer, before all that, he was a tenured philosophy professor in Europe, in Vienna, very established, and he was also happened to be a very accomplished classical organist. And he would, in his spare time, give classical organ concerts across Europe, and very well attended. So he was quite the thing. And all of a sudden, he was like around 40 years old, and he had this kind of unexpected vision that he thought he was supposed to start a hospital in Africa. Mm. The only problem was he wasn't even a doctor. And so he talked to some of his colleagues and friends and said, I think I'm supposed to do this. And, all of them said to a one, "Are you crazy? You're tenured. You're doing sold out classical organ concerts. You got it made. What are you talking about?" And Albert Schweitzer listened to everyone respectfully, and then he resigned and went to medical school so he could become Albert Schweitzer. Mm. So we never know how it's going to unfold, but it's not about leaving. You can be just as alive by staying devoted to what feels like your call your entire life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, Mark, we're very blessed to have had this conversation with you. Your work is amazing, and we just thank you so much for all the wisdom that you've brought to this conversation and the stories that you've shared. I know they've deeply touched my heart, and I can probably say the same for Sarah. And, just to kind of end here, what updates would you like to share with our listeners? And also, where can they follow your journey altogether?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to be with you guys. And so, I'm teaching and traveling all over, and on my website, there's two websites, marknepo.com and a sister website, 3intentions.com, all spelled out. And that has all of my travel schedule and where I am. But there's also, I do want to share that on the very head of both websites, I've just designed that next year in 2020, as we enter a new decade, I'm going to be offering 3 spiritual journeys in different formats. And one is a year-long journey, and these are for small groups. I'm going to limit it to 30 people each. So one is a year-long journey where the same group of people come together 4 weekends over a year, and I will prepare a journey through that. And the other is taking 1 week, 6 full days for a deep dive. And the third is a weekend retreat. But all the details on how to register and if that speaks to anyone and feels right is all up on both websites right there.
Wow. Sarah and I both looked at each other at the same time when you mentioned that. We might have to check that one out.
Oh, yeah, please do and see if it speaks to you. We've purposely, my team has helped me putting this up. None of these will start till like next March. And, we really wanted to put them up ahead of time because these are commitments, and it takes, with people's lives, it takes time to plan it. And if it does speak to you, and see, can you do it and all that. So that's why we put it up so far in advance.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I can say I'm feeling motivated after my work tasks today. I'm going to pull out my sketchbook and I'm going to draw.
Oh, great.
What a pleasure it was to have Mark on with us. We really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with him, and so many simple truths that are so powerful that are applicable to everybody's life. And what a pleasure. And of course, if you guys really enjoyed this episode along with our other ones, you can please share, rate us, review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. And if you're on social media, you can find us at Soul and Wonder Love. Share this episode along with others, and on Facebook at Soul and Wonder. Well, until next time, we will talk to you soon.